Last Monday, Gret Glyer and I debated the question, how would the existence or non-existence of God affect morality? You can find the full debate linked in the description box, but in this video I'm going to show a couple highlights and give my quick first impression of how I thought it went. For those of you not familiar with Gret, he recently uploaded some videos making the repeated claim that objective morality can only exist in a universe with a higher being. I was not at all interested in arguing this contention, as it's built around slippery semantics and doesn't even represent a coherent idea that can be argued. This was clearly illustrated in the attempted debate between him and Holy Kool-Aid, which predictably, not by either person's fault, couldn't gain traction. Instead, the topic we chose addressed something much more concrete, namely the moral consequences of God's presence or absence. Gret had already established a position that nothing is really right or wrong without a God, that morality as we understand it could crumble at any time because even murder, rape, and slavery are perfectly permissible if we don't have a higher being to appeal to. I took the opposite position, which is that secular morality provides us a sound basis for a stable system of morality, and I decided to keep my focus very narrow. This was because the underlying problems with Gret's argument are pretty basic, and bringing a suitcase full of heady philosophical material to the debate would have done little but lead us down endless rabbit trails. This was a topic that needed a little bit of clarity, not a lot of complexity. Cutting through all the messy nonsense that surrounds this argument, Gret is leaning mostly on one core idea, that our obligation to our fellow humans, and the pursuit of human well-being in general, is arbitrary. So my opening statement attempted to dig right at that idea, by pointing out that 1. If our obligation to humans is arbitrary, then there's no good philosophical reason that our obligation to a God would be any less arbitrary. And 2, that questioning the value of human well-being is, to be frank, silly. We take it for granted in basically all areas of human life, and it's only questioned by apologists desperate to make a point about morality. When Gret began his opening, I was surprised to see him answer the question of the debate by repeating his regular assertion.
The position I'm going to defend today is that objective morality can only exist in a universe with a higher being.
I don't see this in and of itself as a clear position on the topic. Sure, it can lead to consequences that he claims stem from relative morality, but like I'd said before, I wasn't going to argue that statement itself. I had made it clear that I really am not interested in addressing the question of whether objective morality can exist with a higher being, or what we call objective morality, but rather what are the consequences of a godless universe or a universe with a god. Strangely, Gret persisted in stating that this was what we were here to discuss, and made some insinuation that I was dodging the topic in favor of emotional appeals.
In all of this, you have chosen arbitrary items, and I think what the case you're trying to make is you're trying to appeal to the audience's feelings. The audience feels like certain things are right or wrong. The audience feels empathy with people who are with victims and people who are oppressed, and you're appealing to that and saying, don't you feel that feeling? Well, if you feel the feeling, then you agree with me. And in reality, you're completely you're reducing your responsibility to prove your own argument. And your argument, and the reason that we're here today, is to discuss whether or not objective morality is possible in a universe with a higher being. And I heard you say maybe you don't think that's a conversation worth having. I think it's it's one of the ultimate conversations worth having.
However, the real question for debate was clear enough that I don't think we need to get into this any further. He did include a few things that I simply didn't find substantial. He made an unflattering portrayal of how Essence of Thought refused to debate him, and later proceeded with statements about how tribalistic the online atheistic community is, and how atheists pride themselves on being the reasonable ones. Take what you will from the fact that these remarks were included. I will say as an aside that even though I agreed to this debate, I understand Essence of Thought's decision not to, and I think response videos do generally provide a better opportunity for fleshing out thoughtful ideas. Live debate is becoming dated in this era of technology, and more serves as a test of how charismatic people are and how well they think on their feet. I see no reason to go into that further, but I think highly of Essence, who was a very nice guy and actually helped me phrase the question we used for this debate, so I just wanted to get in a word on his behalf. When we moved on to our question and answer format, this was the first thing Gret wanted to press me on.
The first thing I want to get off before we get into the question of morality, Prophet Azad, one of the things that I've noticed, and I brought this up in my opening statement, is this tribalism that we see in in the atheist YouTube community, where you know, if you believe in the same thing that we believe in, we accept you and we tell you that you matter. If you don't believe in the same thing that we believe in, we attack you. And you see this quite a bit, especially with YouTube atheists who their channels are basically built on owning people who don't think like them. And so my question to you is, do you think that you are that improperly incentivizes you and others to not care so much about the truth and care more about whether or not your side is winning? Do you think it's possible that it happens a little bit more in the YouTube atheist community? Like, I don't see I don't see hardly any other group on YouTube like trying to make videos where they own people who don't think like them, almost as much as the atheists do. And I'm not as familiar as I could be, but to my that's my perception.
I answered that his statement was anecdotal, that people from within all groups can behave like that, and that our perception of a specific group is partly favored by our biases as viewers. There's no shortage of people on the internet who can accuse the other side of whatever argument as being rude, so this seems like a strange thing to bring to a debate like this, and I'm not really sure why this kept coming up to begin with. Gret's more substantial question was about why we would behave morally in a godless universe if it weren't in our self-interest. Go watch it and make your own fair assessment, but from here I honestly think the debate crumbled for Gret, as he could really only describe how God served as an enforcer for morality, and not once did I hear him give any kind of explanation for why morality would come from God. When I pressed him on it, he basically admitted that he didn't know how it would work and was just making an assertion. Okay, so you say that if a God exists, there is morality. I'm trying to get my mind around, aside from that God having authority to punish us or reward us and to watch over our actions, what other than us wronging that God or not meeting our obligation to that God, what other than that makes there be right or wrong?
Yeah, so there's different ways that people have answered this. Divine command theory is one of them, where God's nature is good, and how in line you are with his nature depends on how good or bad you are. Like the actions that you take would depend on that. I'm not as equipped to answer how morality can work with God, and I've said that before. But I'm more equipped to just talk about the possibility of objective morality can exist with or without a God.
Okay, so I'm just confused, though, because I'm being called upon to explain why morality would exist based on human obligation to humans if there were no God. And I'm trying to get at the heart of, you're saying that there would be morality without, I mean, you're saying there would be morality because there is a God, but that you can't articulate why. So I'm having trouble understanding how to advance my
Sure. I think it's because
why that's the case.
A God that's all powerful and that created everything is capable of creating this idea that we are trying to articulate when we imperfectly call it morality and discuss it philosophically. He's all powerful.
Right. So far we've gotten that he's all powerful, and this is just what I've heard. You're saying that if there was morality, it would come from that God. But that you're not prepared to articulate why it would come from that God or how it would come for him.
How it would, yeah. I mean, I'm not necessarily prepared to articulate that as well. I think people should look up divine command theory for like someone who's for a much better articulation of how that plays out than me. I just think it's possible. Like I said, I believe it's possible with God, and there's different ways it could play out.
Okay, so essentially it's just an assertion at this point in the debate as far as what you're able to bring as far as why or how morality would come from the God. It's a possibility. Is that what we're?
Yeah. That's the extent to which I'm willing to say I can back this up. And like I said, there's plenty of resources out there for people to look into the how of it. But I think the standalone argument of an all powerful God is capable of imbuing the universe with morality is sufficient.
Okay. So if we're leaving it at an assertion, I don't really know how to further pursue that with questions. I do have one question. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's not really my turn. I was just gonna say, I mean, this is something I've been making a singular assertion online for a while now, and several people have made videos about it, assuming I have all sorts of ulterior motives behind this singular assertion, but really, I think you're at a place right now where you're realizing, oh, it's just an assertion. That's it. And so that's why I've been confused by this backlash from the atheist YouTube community. It's like, guys, it's a singular assertion, and for the most part, I'm guessing you probably already agree with it.
No, I've explained already that I don't. If it's just an assertion, that's fine. My confusion at this point of this is a debate, and we're trying to articulate where our ideas of morality come from. And so if it doesn't advance further than an assertion, I just really don't know what to do with it. From there, a few notes of point were brought up. Gret asked me why we should be more concerned with human well-being than with the well-being of goldfish or bacteria, and I wasn't totally thrilled with the answer I came up with on the spot.
So why emphasize human morality over goldfish morality, or human flourishing over goldfish flourishing?
Because, well, I think we should try to be decent to animals as well. I mean, I think ultimately, well, for one thing, I mean, partly it's just the bias we have. We're going to want to advance the needs of our species. Also, you take into account, I think any reasonable humane person is going to take into account the well-being of animals as well. So I don't think that there's just an automatic line dividing, why do we advance the well-being of humans versus the well-being of goldfish?
What about the well-being of bacteria?
That's where I said at the beginning, you kind of have to assess, who am I in the universe with? What obligation is owed them? We don't see bacteria as having any kind of intelligence, probably, that feels harm or suffering the same way we do. And ultimately, there's got to be a certain level of realism in what you're able to do. We can't protect all. We can't protect all bacteria, I guess, in the same way as all humans. But really, it still comes down to empathy and reciprocity, I think. And the same question. See, these questions don't undermine secular morality magically in a way that they do undermine. I'm sorry. I'm getting my negatives mixed up. I don't think that these ideas undermine secular morality in a way that they couldn't equally undermine a theistic version of morality. Because then the same question comes, why is the will of a god magically more important than the will of humans? But in short, I think the key thing was that Gret could provide no reason why morality comes from God, or why our obligation to him is inherently more moral than our obligation to other people. I believe this is because Gret did not arrive at his feeling of obligation to God for any philosophical reason at all. Rather, his religious instruction put a literary character at the center of his entire concept of right and wrong, and trained him to take obedience to it for granted. And now he's stuck in a position, as a thinking adult, of having to retroactively wrap philosophical language around what he'd been taught for no good reason. Gret strikes me as a nice young man who cares about being good to others regardless of what his Bible says, and he's made what look like very impressive and heartfelt efforts to help the poor. For those who might want to view him solely as an antagonist in an annoying argument, remember that these YouTube encounters are just a small part of his life. My take on the situation is that he's been trained to misunderstand why he does good things he does, and that he stepped out and got in a little over his head in trying to argue a philosophical position based on this. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this debate for now. I know this is a pretty incomplete review, but I only have a few hours to write, record, and edit this. For those interested, I will likely make a few videos expounding on ideas I didn't have a chance to address in the debate. I'm out of the woods with these live productions for the time being, so I'm hoping I can get back on track with a good string of normal scripted videos. See you next week!